So what I have done is to look at the SDG 14 and then see how the SDG 14 targets and indicators kind of match with the policies that we have in India. So, I mean, as you know, this is about life below water, but then we know that life below water is very much linked to the lives and livelihoods above water. So therefore, the fishing, the shipping activity, exploration, exploitation, there's so many mining activities. So many activities are interfacing in the marine space. So therefore, I'm trying to see how we can look at the old SDG 14 from a fishery perspective. So, and then because we know that we are slowly moving into multi-sectoral, into ecosystem approach, and there is a broadening of perspective where people are expected to collaborate and to cooperate. In that perspective, I think I'm trying to see how do we look at these targets. So then, first, I think I just give an idea about the main kind of targets that I have called out of the SDG 14. Which are of relevance and consequence to fisheries. And then before getting into this, I just wanted to draw the attention to the audience that if you look at all the SDGs, 17 were mentioned to, you can see that most of the time-bound targets are in fact mentioned under SDG 14. So mostly 2020, 2020, 2025. So you can see that more than any other SDGs, the time-bound targets are given in the time-bound goals are given in the SDG 14. So therefore, we have to maybe take that a little more seriously and see whether we are also giving kind of urgent attention to some of the issues flagged in this thing. So, for example, if you take the first one, marine pollution of all kinds to be reduced from land-based activities, that is and that has to be done by 2025, and then you have a target 14.2 talking about sustainably managing and protecting marine and coastal ecosystems by 2022. We are already in 2021. Then minimizing the impact of ocean acidification, 14.3, which of course has no timeline given. And then regulate harvesting and end overfishing, IUU fishing, destructive fishing practice, and implement science-based management plans by 2020. Then again, by 2020, to conserve 10% of coastal and marine areas. By 2020, to prohibit certain forms of fisheries subsidies that contribute to overcapacity and overfishing, illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. And then there are last two targets which are very significant from our point of view. One is this access for small-scale artisanal fisheries to marine resources and markets, and then implementing international law for the conservation and sustainable use of oceans and the resources. So these are the kind of the key kind of targets I have picked out of the goal 14. And then if you look at the Indian legal and policy instruments, it's very interesting that, say, you look at the Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act 1974, it actually has provisions for coastal states to address pollution of seas and tidal waters. Of course, when you look at seas and tidal waters in the Act, it is defined as included under the word streams. Therefore, we have to see the word stream, and then stream applies to seas and tidal waters too. Therefore, we can see that there are provisions for addressing pollution, land-based source of pollution in this Water Pollution Act 1974, which is perhaps one of the earliest legislation if you look at many developing countries that we are aware of. And then it's interesting that although there is a legislation, we are yet to have any legislation to prevent marine debris. In fact, if you look at some of the recent work done by Government of India, I think National Maritime Foundation, for example, recently drew attention to the fact that there is no kind of legislation for floating plastic debris And I think there is a collaborative initiative between India and Norway to develop a marine debris policy for India, for example. So therefore, these are important. I think plastic debris, as all of you know, has a lot of impact on fisheries, on the resources of living resources. And plastic debris, I would also include, for example, the fishing nets, the ghost fishing nets that Kumar referred to earlier. So I think even those areas we can see whether one can try to maybe change the webbing material of fishing nets from synthetic material to some kind of organic materials, which is biodegradable, for example. So I know that Norway, for example, has developed some fishing gear which are made out of hemp. Hemp is like a plant-based kind of a fishing fiber, which biodegrades. Therefore, we can think in terms of whether one can, in course of time, change the fishing gear material from non-biodegradable to biodegradable. Therefore, I think that the legal provision exists. It needs some kind of an amendment. And then if you look at the endangered or threatened marine species, you can see that Wildlife Protection Act 1972 refers to that. It was adequately dealt with earlier. I think, but having said that, the important point that we have to keep in mind when we talk about Wildlife Protection Act is that, see, the Wildlife Protection Act actually kicks into action when the species has no other protection. So therefore, it is the last resort of the species. So therefore, it is once you are within the Wildlife Protection Act ambit, I think then that species by law have to be given full protection by the state. So therefore, I think the responsibility on the fishing community and the fisheries administration is that we don't allow the fisheries species to reach a stage where they need this kind of full protection. Examples are the kind of shark species, some of the molluscan species which were threatened with extinction, and how the Wildlife Protection Act had to be invoked to protect those species. So when you reach that stage, I think it is probably gets into this conflict between conservation and livelihood. So therefore, before this kind of conflict exacerbates, I think there is a need for using existing fisheries legislation for conservation and sustainable use to make sure that there is a very effective management in place. So therefore, I think that is important to keep in mind that Wildlife Protection Act is not a fisheries instrument, but is actually an instrument to protect the species. And then, of course, we have the coastal regulation zone notification, which under the Environment Protection Act, and this goes up to the limit of the territorial sea, to my understanding. And then, you can deal with the coastal zone and including the territorial sea within that, and look at the land-based sources of pollution and various impacts on that area, and how to conserve and protect the coastal and marine environment. And then we have the National Biodiversity Act 2002. Again, National Biodiversity Act 2002, from my understanding, does not really have a coverage of the coastal and marine biodiversity. I think it needs maybe some kind of amendment so that we have, incorporating the Jakarta Protocol of Convention on Biological Diversity, so that it sort of broadened in scope also to look at the importance of marine and coastal biodiversity. I'm saying this because in between maybe not very effective, not so effective fisheries conservation measures and the most effective wildlife protection measures, we can try to pitch the National Biodiversity Act and the Biodiversity Board and the biodiversity committees at the local level as an interface, so that we can see that there is more kind of a focus on the sustainable use as well as on the conservation part. So therefore, when you start fisheries legislation, then move into the biodiversity legislation, and finally the Wildlife Protection Act. So that is this is the way I would like to see our legislation sequenced when we talk about conservation and sustainable use. And then if you look at the fisheries policies now, if you look at the National Policy on Marine Fisheries 2017, and then there is now an integrated national fisheries policy coming up, a sixth draft we have seen, and where they're trying to combine marine inland all into one policy. And there also there is a reference to mainstreaming biodiversity conservation, species-specific and zonal area-specific management plans, conservation of ecologically and biologically significant areas and vulnerable marine ecosystems, protection of iconic and endangered and threatened species, creation of fish refugia, optimizing fishing effort, and formulating management plans. Of course, this is a fairly large set of activities which you can see reflect a lot of international concerns coming out of the FAO, out of the Convention on Biological Diversity type of discussions, the Conference of Parties. And then the Law of the Sea Convention, for example, talks about vulnerable marine ecosystems, including the habitats of turtles that was referred to earlier. Therefore, all these things are now reflected in the policy, but then the policy also need some kind of a legal backing. So therefore, I think we also need to make sure that there is an act which is happening in the EEZ, so that existing, for example, the coastal waters coming under the Marine Fishing Regulation Act, which is, not really taking into all the developments post Law of the Sea Convention adoption in 1982, and then the UN Fish Stocks Agreement and the Code of Conduct. So many developments happened after the Marine Fishing Regulation Act came into the state kind of a domain. So I think this also needs some kind of updating. And then I think there is the National Fisheries Policy. The new draft is talking about preparing a model bill for conservation of the coastal states, similar to the model bill which the central government developed in the 1970s, which led to most of the states, in fact, all states having a Marine Fishing Regulation Act over a period of time. So therefore, this is an important area when we talk about the territorial sea. And then when we talk about the EEZ, to establish a sound mechanism for the Indian fleet does not engage in IUU fishing within its own EEZ and the area beyond national jurisdiction. When there are several cases, for example, from Tutur boats from near Kanyakumari fishing, or from Cochin, going to Seychelles or into the British Indian Ocean Territory. So therefore, the Indian vessels are now increasingly moving during the calm fishing seasons to other EEZs and into territorial waters of other countries, so which need some kind of a regulation. And then this also links up to having a comprehensive legislation for fishing by the national fleet in the EEZ, which unfortunately still in the pipeline. It has not yet been enacted. This has been going on for, I think, since 2003. I think there were various drafts which were being discussed. So I think this legislation also we need to consider because this legislation basically is an expression of the commitment that India has made when it ratified the United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea in 1995, and then subsequently at the UN Fish Stocks Agreement, which I think India ratified in 2002. So therefore, these kind of commitments internationally made, we need to transpose into national legislation, and this is very much required to have a national EEZ Act, and then along with that, amended Marine Fishing Regulation Act for the territorial sea, so that we are at par with all the international obligations and kind of duties of a coastal state like India. And then, of course, if you look at the Blue Economy 2020 draft policy framework, it talks about carbon efficient practices to improve water quality near coral reefs, or they talk about low carbon fishing practices. So these are all interesting kind of proposals coming from the Blue Economy policy, which is now being discussed by many people. And then there is also the talk of in the National Fisheries Policy draft that India will comply with the rules and regulations set under the international instruments relating to fishing in the EEZ and the area beyond national jurisdiction. So area beyond national jurisdiction effectively means the high seas. Or it could mean that fishing in the EEZ of other countries, like if there is an agreement between India and say Kenya on the eastern coast of Africa, or with Mozambique, then they would also be in area beyond national jurisdiction. It's beyond the jurisdiction of India. You're having a fisheries agreement, for example, with those countries. So these are all possibilities if you go by the experience of countries in West Africa with Europe, or with the US with the Pacific countries, so on and so forth. I mean, these are all very, very detailed areas to visit if you want to go into the detail. Yeah. And then for us, the most important SDG perhaps will be the 14B, which is talking about access for small-scale artisanal fishers to resources and to markets. I think it's very important. This also, you can see that many of the elements to support small-scale fisheries are, in fact, captured in the Indian policy instruments. For example, if you look at the National Marine Fisheries Policy 2017 and the new draft policy, there is reference to increasing the area presently available to traditional fishers in the territorial waters. So therefore, there is a proposal like that to broaden the area. I think this perhaps could tie up with what the previous speakers spoke about, creating an area where there is less fishing intensity, less of destructive or more invasive type of fishing operations. So you try to make it more stationary gear or maybe non-motorized fishing, so things like that one can think of within that framework. And then National Marine Fisheries Policy 2017 talks about secure tenure rights of the traditional fishers. So tenure rights is an important concept. I think it's probably 2017 policy was the first instrument which recognized this importance. But when you look at tenure rights, basically it has got maybe 6 kind of dimensions. One is that it talks about who is fishing, and then 2, we can talk about what kind of species is being fished, and then 3, we can talk about where is the fishing taking place. Then 4, we can talk about what kind of craft is used for fishing. Then 5, we can talk about what kind of gear is used for fishing. So therefore, there are different dimensions to tenure rights, and I think this is one way to make sure that there is no kind of perceived threat to livelihood to the coastal fishing communities when there are kind of conflicting and comparative kind of relations between different users of the marine space, because the small-scale fisheries perhaps is the earliest user of the marine space. And even today, if you look at some of the OECD figures, it says that the largest employment in the marine sector, if you take all key blue economy type of activities, is still fishing. So therefore, we need to make sure that those who traditionally used still have some preferential right to their livelihood based on marine resources. So therefore, marine fishing in small-scale sector is very important to protect and secure. And in this context, securing tenure rights very important in light of all the new developments vis-a-vis the blue economy. And then we talk about strengthening and implementing safety at sea measures. I think there was the previous presentation talked about the climate change impact, and one of the main impacts of climate change, if you remember what happened after Oki, was that the fishing vessels were caught at sea. For the first time, many people died at sea while fishing. Not that the cyclone hit you on land and destroyed your houses, but while you're fishing in the fishing ground, your boat was knocked down, and then you drowned, and so many things happened. So therefore, this also highlights the importance of integrating safety at sea into resource management measures. So therefore, I mean, if you look at the small-scale fisheries guidelines that FAO has brought out, there is a very clear recognition that safety at sea, in light of the climate change and the extreme weather events, have to be factored into resource management. And then the previous speaker spoke about how resources are shifting. There is some resources are moving to higher latitudes, some resources are moving to the deeper waters. So all these need, new kind of alignment between the resource users and the resources. Therefore, you may have to go to new fishing grounds, which is not familiar to you in the past. Maybe the seasonal nature will change. So therefore, safety at sea, I think we need to develop a new perspective in light of all the climate change impacts and see we can make their life more predictable, secure at sea and on the coast. And then the role of women is very important. If you look at the new National Marine Fisheries Policy 27, very strongly supports women cooperatives. It talks about women-friendly financial support schemes. Talks about good working conditions, including safety, security and hygiene, and transport facilities for retail marketing. So these are all very important recognitions, because fishery cannot be seen only something happening at sea. It should also be seen along the value chain, and in the value chain, women are most actively present on the coast in fish processing, in fish retailing, so on and so forth. So therefore, we need to make sure that the interests of women are very well protected in that kind of in a fisheries policy in a broader perspective. And then there is also a suggestion in the new Marine Fisheries National Marine Fisheries Policy 2017 that women should be encouraged to take up small-scale fishing. Traditionally, fishing is seen as a men's activity. So maybe one can see whether women can be trained in some safe type of fishing operations based on their interests to undertake fishing operation, and then new types of value addition activities, and how they can also actively engage in fisheries management. So fisheries management is not necessarily activities only at sea. A lot of activities are shore-based or landing center-based. So those kind of activities, probably the women can play an active role as a backup support to the fisheries management. So I think we can integrate this kind of a broad gender perspective into resource management as well. And then I think perhaps the most up-to-date perspective on fisheries will be seen in the voluntary guidelines for securing sustainable small-scale fisheries, which came out of FAO. In fact, these guidelines are dedicated by the FAO Committee on Fisheries to Chandrika Sharma. So, and these guidelines promote a human rights-based approach. I think it's very important. So human rights-based approach, again, does not mean that we are only talking about civil and political rights. I think it talks about economic rights, social rights, cultural rights, then the women's, the Beijing Convention, and so many right to development, right to a clean environment, all these are human rights. So I think this basically helps you to understand various dimensions of human rights-based approach. And then it talks about the importance of consultation and participation, so that we don't necessarily talk about all the policies from a top-down perspective. We also have an active consultation process similar to what Dr. Shivakumar was referring to earlier, about the dugong conservation. So we can have similar kind of approach, consultation, participation, which definitely can lead to better participation of fishers in certain type of fishing operation, to prevent maybe some destructive fishing, to use gear more responsibly, to decide about wise use of the seasons for fishing. There's so many things one can think of by applying these guidelines. So I think that's very important to take into account. And the new Marine Fisheries Policy 2017 talks about it, but the 2020 draft somehow there is no mention of that. So we would strongly urge that these guidelines have become a very cornerstone to all the fisheries policies of any consequence to small-scale fisheries. And then there is, if you look at the value chain, the land-based access to resource, access to market. If you look at the access to market point of view, there is talk about product diversification, improving value addition, product branding, enhancing the reach to new markets in different parts of the world. So therefore, we're not seeing fish only as something to be a local subsistence, because, for example, the squid and cuttlefish that the Trivandrum fishers catch ends up in the Southern Europe, because that is demand is in Southern Europe. So therefore, it needs an export market. Similarly, if sardine is caught in Andhra Pradesh, that sardine will end up in Kerala, because Kerala is the most important market for sardine. Therefore, there are a lot of movement within the country between marine fisheries in one part and another part, and between marine fisheries and inland fisheries, and then between the national and the international market. So therefore, we have to make sure that we give sufficient flexibility to the stakeholders in the sector. And in this context, eco-labeling is very important. Probably you're aware of the Worldwide Fund initiative in Ashtamudi Lake to certify some clam fisheries. I think CMFRI was involved within that. There is also, certification of skipjack tuna, say from Maldives. Maybe the same labeling program can come to Lakshadweep, for example. The same stocks are being shared between Maldives and Lakshadweep and India. So we can see how eco-labeling can also make sure that there is better market access. And then there is a talk of reducing dependency of fishers on middlemen and private financiers, strengthening marketing through fishermen-run and state-run harbor-based cooperatives. I think there are examples like this especially in Kerala, in Maharashtra, and Gujarat. I think these maybe need to be further strengthened. Maybe the cooperatives still are very much into marketing of fish. They should be trained maybe to also take an active interest in resource management, for example. So these are all important kind of a role that a new modern cooperative can play. So therefore, I think the National Marine Fisheries Policy talks about that. So we can see whether this can be transposed into action. And then if you look at the blue economy framework, it also has very interesting language. It talks about introducing a market intervention scheme in marine fisheries to insulate fishers and fish vendors against extreme price fluctuation. So if there is a very sharp drop in prices, can there be a mechanism for these fishermen to be compensated for the loss? I know that, for example, Korea had this kind of a policy when they developed a distant water fishery. So people were reluctant to go for fishing. And then they said that if the price is going to be below a certain level, then the state will step in and buy it. So therefore, there are kind of many countries that use this kind of minimum support price for fishing to make sure that those who are in the sector are encouraged to invest and then to bring their catch back to the shore. So therefore, this is again one interesting intervention that has been suggested by the Blue Economy Framework. And then it talks about priority sector lending. 10% of the total priority sector should be kept only for fishers. And they're saying that don't include in this the sector lending to fish processing activity. Therefore, only for fishing activity, which probably a large number of poor people are undertaking. They're saying that the priority sector lending can be earmarked for that those people. So that's also an excellent suggestion coming from the draft policy. And then there is also talk about interest subvention. You try to give interest subsidies, credit subsidies to encourage that sustainable fishing and fish marketing practices. So that if you are into a certain type of sustainable fishing, then there will be some incentive. Say, for example, today we have a fuel subsidy given to the fishing sector in some of the states, diesel subsidy, kerosene subsidy, so on and so forth. So tomorrow, if we say that if you are into sustainable fishing, into using certain quantity of gear, fishing in a certain season, reporting the catches, then we will give you the subsidy. Therefore, we can link this fuel subsidy as an incentive for fishers to actively participate in responsible fishing practices. Therefore, I think these are all interesting way also to engage with the ongoing debate in fisheries subsidies in WTO, because we don't have to always take a defensive position. We can also take a very much a conservation sustainable use perspective and then say that we will try to convert existing destructive type of subsidies into more creative, into more incentive-based system for people to move from destructive fishing to more responsible fishing practices. Yeah. And then I would like to make some observations. I think we have to see that fishery cannot be seen only as a central subject or the state subject. We need to see that within the framework of the cooperative federalism. Our Prime Minister is very keen on cooperative federalism. Therefore, we can see whether center-state relations can be kind of better articulated in this framework, because up to the limit of the territorial sea is the jurisdiction of the state for marine fishing. And then beyond is the jurisdiction of the center, therefore there is need for cooperation and collaboration. And then again, even within the territorial sea, and then one particular kind of waters which people don't discuss too much in India is the concept of internal waters, because we have a baseline concept. The baseline is what belongs to the law of the sea convention. So we normally measure the EEZ from the baseline. But there are definitely waters on the landward side of the baseline. I mean, we can see there are many examples in India. If you take different states, especially West Bengal or Gujarat, you can see that very large areas are within the baseline, and they are called the internal waters. So therefore, in this kind of internal water concept, we can even involve Panchayat Raj institutions, because Panchayat Raj institutions, as per the constitution, can do some work in fisheries, but so far to our knowledge, none of the Panchayat Raj institutions are actively engaged in marine fishing. Maybe they would do some bit of inland fishing in Bihar for licensing, for auctions or tanks, so on and so forth, but not into marine fishing. Therefore, we can bring Panchayat Raj institutions into areas where the villages are adjacent or coterminous with the internal waters. So therefore, bays and like a very kind of fluid coastline where there is muddy waters, like in Sundarbans. I think these are the areas where Panchayat Raj institutions can be very actively brought into fisheries. So that will ensure public participation. That will ensure that through public participation, we can concentrate on resource management. So these are important kind of areas to be looked into. And then when we talk about ecosystem approach to fisheries, I think it's very important that we need to consider coordination and cooperation across sectors. As I said earlier, some are like highly protective and some are more sustainable use. Maybe right now it's more development at one end and protection at the other end. So we need to slightly change the shades of this kind of instruments to, there is no development which is not sustainable development. So therefore we can see development can be, we can add a prefix sustainable to that. And then we have a protection, Wildlife Protection Act, if everything fails, and that should become as a protection and last recourse of the most threatened species with extinction. So therefore that we need to properly sequence these kind of instruments, and then there is of course need for more coordination and cooperation. And that again, the issue of governance approach, I think governance approach means that people should be able to work together, not only fisheries, but another type of interest in the marine space, environment, then conservation, pollution, I mean, mining activities, or oil and gas. Everybody has to sit and see how to ensure that there's equity, and that those who have early access to resources are not marginalized. So in this context, I'm happy to hear about the dugong experiment, where the fishermen also, participating in that kind of conservation, and a very interesting example to keep in mind. And then I think when we look at SDG 14, I think very important also to keep in mind that, see, SDG is it's a set of goals which are very much interrelated. If you look into, say, for example, SDG, I think there is one SDG which talks about well-being. So if you do sustainable fisheries, you do economic development, social development, you have to make sure that these translate into some well-being of the coastal community. Otherwise, coastal communities are not interested in responsible fishing. They might do things which they think is very much in their short-term interest. So therefore, I think we have to see whether reduction of poverty, hunger, food security, then decent work, employment, then sustainable consumption, reducing inequality, improving the institution. There's so many SDGs are there. Suppose, can we actually see how SDG 14 relate with other SDGs and vice versa? How other SDGs contribute to SDG 14? For example, if my son can get a job in another activity, in an agricultural activity, maybe he should leave fishing and do that, because rather than adding to the workforce, which is maybe too many people, following too few fish. So therefore, one can see how, for example, or maybe boats can be used for conservation purpose. You take them for doing some statistical monitoring of the threatened species, iconic species, and you can see ways of diversifying the livelihood base of the coastal community. So therefore, all that I think requires a broader mindset, and then to see how these SDGs can be seen, kind of across in a transverse manner. And then last but not the least, we have to, the strategic importance of small-scale fisheries should be recognized for food security, poverty reduction, economic and social development, disaster preparedness, including for, in light of COVID, we should talk about pathogen-induced disasters, not only natural disasters and human-induced disasters. We should also talk about pathogen-induced disasters like COVID-19, and then sustainable use of marine and inland living resources. Again, I think the inland fisheries also should be slowly integrated into marine. So in that context, I welcome the National Fisheries Policy, which is trying to bring marine and inland together, because there are overlapping spaces, and culture-based fisheries become very important in the inland sector, and then the larvae may be taken from the estuary. So therefore, a lot of overlapping spaces are there which can be integrated into looking at marine and inland together. So therefore, we start in the mountains, you go to the limit of the EEZ, and then other type of outside the EEZ and other high seas or the other EEZs, we can see what kind of international agreements or bilateral agreements India can go for. And then within this, I think very important to apply a human rights-based approach. To me, the most important element of human rights-based approach is the consultation and participation. So therefore, the communities are taken on board, whatever be the decision, and we do implement decisions which are very much developed through consensus with every key stakeholders. Yeah, and then of course tenure rights is also important in a common property regime. So that also should combine with a human rights-based approach. That's it to my presentation. Yeah, thank you.